Hey class, welcome to, I guess the official last week will be next week, but this week is the official last week of your quizzes and the chapter reviews. So we have covered a ton of information, and I have to say this is probably, well, it definitely is the most exciting chapter. Chapter 18 with applied psychology is really talking about, as you read it, you'll understand it's taking everything that you've learned and now deciding how do you use this in the real world? How do you use everything that you've learned, not only in your personal life, but how do you use it in a job, in a future career? And that's what we're going to discuss today. So pay specific attention to certain notes. If I ask you to write something down, make sure to write it down because it probably because it's a test question. It's kind of surprising how many students may not have taken notes or watched the course videos in their entirety because some of the questions that I thought were pretty much layups. They were easy, and I actually said this is a test question, and people actually did not have a correct answer. So just make sure you take some notes, write them down. Of course, these are open book tests, as you know, so please take advantage of that. So let's get started. So as we're diving into this information, here are a few things to consider. Psychology, of course, is used in a lot of different fields in a variety of different ways. So think about all of the concepts that we talked about psychology, about how we learn, how you retain information, how you interpret that data, that information that you receive, and how it changes your self-knowledge and your behavior, your own behavior. And think about how is your experience, how is your personality also, how is it going to impact your future work or your current job? How could you use it in that chosen career field? Also, do you think some of the areas of the field that you choose, whatever field you go into, are going to be more helpful than others? If so, which ones? So which ones are you going to use psychology more in, and what fields may you not use psychology as much? I think you'll find out that in almost every field, whether it's in sales or it's a field that's highly technical, you have to deal with people. And when you deal with people, you deal with what you learned here in the psychology course. And of course, the other thought is, what is something that you learned about the field of psychology that has a potential to greatly impact either your career or your personal relationships? And again, I sincerely hope that the information that you've learned can be applied in your own lives in some way, will make your life better. If that happens, then our time spent together is definitely worth it. So this chapter 18, the objectives, after reading the chapter and also, of course, listening to this lecture, you should be able to do the things on the screen. I'm not going to read them. We're going to get right to the material. But of course, you can pause the video if you're not quite sure. And of course, what I'd like to do, as always, is start it off with a quick video on this subject.
Welcome to the culminating chapter of our journey through Introduction to Psychology, Gateways to Mind and Behavior by Dennis Kuhn, John Mitterer and Tanya Martini. We also want to give special thanks to Ivy Consulting Group for sponsoring all 18 chapter summaries. In this final installment, we delve into the captivating realm of applied psychology, where theory meets real-world practice and psychological insights across diverse domains. From clinical and counseling psychology to industrial organizational psychology and beyond, we aim to gain a holistic understanding of how psychological principles are integrated into addressing practical challenges, improving human well-being, and enhancing organizational effectiveness. Let's begin. Ever wondered how psychology can transform your daily life? Welcome to the world of applied psychology. This intriguing field takes psychology's principles and uses them in real-world situations. Imagine from the healthcare sector to the dynamic world of business, and even into the realm of education, applied psychology has a broad and impactful reach. It's not just about understanding human behavior, but also about utilizing this knowledge to improve our lives. Applied psychology is more than just a theory, it's a tool for enhancing every facet of human life. Now you may ask, where do we see applied psychology in action? Well, it's all around us, subtly shaping many aspects of our lives. Let's take a look at some specific fields. Firstly, there's clinical psychology. This field is all about understanding, preventing and relieving psychologically based distress or dysfunction. It's the psychologists in this field who diagnose and treat mental, emotional and behavioral disorders. Next, we have counseling psychology. Counselors assist people with personal, family, educational, mental health and career decisions and problems. Their goal? To help individuals improve their well-being, alleviate distress, resolve crises, and increase their ability to function better in their lives. Then there's industrial organizational psychology. This branch focuses on the workplace, aiming to improve productivity and work-life balance. It's about making the office a happier and more efficient place. Lastly, educational psychology involves the study of how people learn. It's all about enhancing the learning process and improving educational outcomes. From helping individuals overcome their mental health struggles to optimizing workplace productivity, applied psychology casts a wide net. So, how does applied psychology make a difference in our lives? Well, let's start with mental health. By understanding and applying psychological principles, therapists can help individuals combat anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues. This can lead to improved well-being and quality of life. Now consider learning and memory. Educational psychologists use their knowledge to develop strategies that enhance learning outcomes. They make it easier for us to remember and understand complex information. That's right, applied psychology can make you a better learner. In the workplace, organizational psychologists apply their understanding to boost job satisfaction and productivity. They foster positive work environments and help resolve conflicts, making our daily grind a little less grinding. Then there's our personal relationships. Family psychologists and couple therapists use applied psychology to foster better communication, understanding and empathy, making our bonds stronger and more fulfilling. Applied psychology, therefore, holds the key to unlocking our full potential. What does the future hold for applied psychology? The horizon gleams with potential. As the world becomes increasingly complex, applied psychology will continue to grow in importance. It promises to shape our future, offering solutions to societal issues and enhancing well-being on both individual and community levels. It's not just about understanding human behavior anymore, it's about applying that understanding to build better societies, to create positive change. As we navigate the complexities of the 21st century, applied psychology stands as a beacon guiding us towards a happier, healthier and more productive society. Before we conclude, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to all of you for joining us on this enlightening exploration of psychology. I hope this journey has sparked a deeper curiosity and understanding of the intricate workings of the human mind and behavior. This insightful series was created by Professor Jeffrey Hastings and made possible by Ivy Consulting Group, Inc. As we draw this chapter to a close, remember that the pursuit of knowledge knows no bounds. Continue on your journey to improve your understanding of psychology, the human brain, motivation, and human behavior. Whether you are a student, a professional, or an enthusiast, the quest for knowledge is a lifelong adventure. Thank you for watching, and may your exploration of psychology continue to inspire and enrich your understanding of the world around you.
So as you can see, IO psychology really is a very dynamic and robust field. You know, and I can tell you too, as you are entering, if you are in high school, if you're in the dual credit program, or if you're a college student, you know, you probably are wondering what the future holds and how AI, especially generative AI, is going to impact a lot of different type of careers. And when you look at certain type of professions or industries, there's a couple that really, I think, stand out to show you that AI, the biggest weakness is that creativity that the human brain will allow. So the biggest industries, the way that I see it, are healthcare, mental health, and of course, the dynamics of teamwork. And so when we get into IO psychology, or you look at careers like this, I think that the future looks very, very bright if you do decide to go into this type of career. So industrial organizational psychology, or IO psychology, is the definition is the study of people at work and in organizations, and it's one of the most important applied areas of psychology. And it's applied meaning that how you apply what you learn to the real world. So the efforts of IO psychologists, will likely affect how you're either selected for a job, as well as how you would be tested, trained, and evaluated for a work promotion. Most IO psychologists, that's industrial organizational psychologists, are employed either by the businesses by themselves or by the government. But typically, a lot of these IO psychologists are contractors that work for organizations like Ivy Consulting Group, and they're hired on a contract basis to come in and improve that team dynamic or help that organization go through massive change that they're undertaking. And right now, a lot of the work that I work on are helping companies that are transitioning to either a remote or a hybrid work environment, and helping companies make a successful transition. So, but typically their IO psychologists usually work in one or two major areas, either studying jobs to identify the necessary skills needed for success within that job. So if a company hired you as an IO psychologist, you would go in, look at the job, see what was required, what type of skill set or personality traits or attributes or experiences are necessary that would give someone a higher probability of a success in that job, which can actually guide the efforts for the organization to select the right people for the right jobs. And the right jobs meaning not just one that they would do well in, but one that they would actually enjoy. Because what we've learned is that engagement of the employee, the well-being, the way that they look at that job, if they like it, they're more likely to also be good in that job because they actually like going to work. And then the second area is for IO psychologists, the type of work is studying organizations to kind of understand how to create the structure of the company culture that will improve performance. That's the organizational part. And culture, we'll talk about here in a moment, but culture is just, something that companies very rarely, I hate to say this, but it's true, but they very rarely intentionally create culture. What they normally do is companies, especially startups, they just allow their culture to happen and hope that they have a great culture. They think if we just treat people the right way, then the culture is going to be great. Everyone's going to be energized and excited, and they're all going to be on board to help make that company grow. And a lot of times with a new organization, that can be true, but it's as the organization ages, it is harder and harder to do as you have these employees that get settled, and you have maybe a person that's not a great leader in the wrong position can really destroy a work culture, a work group culture. So we'll talk more about that here in a moment. But overall, there are three important goals that are pursued by IO psychologists, and they are either helping employers deal with the employees fairly. That's if you've heard of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. That's where that kind of fits in. The second goal pursued by IO psychologists are helping to make jobs more interesting and satisfying. And if they do that, if an IO psychologist is effective at making that job more interesting and satisfying for the employee, then the third thing is helping workers to be more productive. And that's really what the employer wants, of course. They all would like their employees to be happy, but the truth is, the owners of the organization or the executives, the owners of the organization, truly what they want is productivity, profitability. They want to make money. That's what it's all about with the companies that you would work with. So let's look at culture a little bit deeper. Businesses and other organizations, whether they're large or small, they develop these distinct cultures. And the organizational culture, it refers to the blend of their customs, their belief, values, attitudes, and even rituals that makes each company unique. Organizational culture, that includes such thing as how people are hired and trained, how they're disciplined when their job performance is not up to par, and how, of course, they would be terminated. Their contract could be terminated. It also includes how employees, how they dress, communicate with one another, how they resolve conflicts, share power, or how they identify with these organizational values, and how they negotiate contracts and even celebrate special occasions. And as I mentioned before, that unfortunately most companies, they fail to really actively create the culture. Rather, the culture is just something that kind of happens. But that's unfortunate for them. But that's great news for an IO psychologist, because it means they would need us to go in then go into the organization, because they usually they don't hire you, a contractor, unless they have a problem. And this, I can tell you, is probably 7 out of 10 times you would be hired as an IO psychologist is because there's a problem with the organization and they need to hire you to help you come and resolve that problem. So that's where we come in. IO psychologists help the company leaders focus their attention on developing a high-performance culture where employees are motivated, they're happy, and they're engaged in their work. But how do you measure culture? Is it something you can measure? So at Ivy Consulting Group, we have created a lot of tools that I won't go into all of them, but just to let you know that on the screen, there are some things that we consider measurable indicators and how we organize or how we measure the organizational culture. And there's some kind of things that are intangible indicators you can't really see, and they're very, very hard to measure. And so those measurable indicators, that's a number of business development meetings. How many are they really meeting with their people? Are they delivering what the company's expectations are? If they're not talking about what the company's expectations are and they don't have a tool to measure it, if you can't measure and give your team a goal or benchmark to kind of strive for, then they're kind of just guessing, and it just doesn't work. And we look at the number of training hours, a percentage of performance goals that they actually meet, the ones that they fail, and how many are the percentage of these goals are well over the minimum goal where their team just really blew it out of the water, and how many performance awards are given. What happens whenever there's a risk taker that fails? How are they even treated? Because what we've learned too is you've got to allow a safe place for failure to happen without criticism. Because if you criticize too much when someone fails, they're going to stop trying. So you have to have that safe environment to say, listen, the only reason you failed is you tried. And it's okay to try. What's not okay is for you just to sit in a job and not do anything. So there's also some intangible indicators. Their overall employee satisfaction. We can make that tangible by doing surveys, but just guessing makes it, and it's still intangible, but we have to actually go out and seek that information. The employee satisfaction with company's goals, with job training, their satisfaction with their own performance. So these are all through surveys. They're driven through surveys, and that employee will self-report on if how they believe the organization is doing. And also to know that there is a culture within the organization, but what's not covered in the book, but really it should, there's also a team culture. You can have an organization where the CEO, a big organization, thinks the culture is one thing, but when it goes down into these team dynamics, these smaller work groups, the culture can be completely different. And when there is an adversarial kind of culture, it creates a lot of problems. So that's one thing to know as well. But of course, if you look into a career with IO psychology. So organizational citizenship, that really, just know the definition. It's making positive contributions from a worker's perspective, that you make a contribution to the success of the organization in a way that goes over and above what was expected of you. That's what leaders look for. Keep that in mind when you get a job at a place that you would like to work. You are being evaluated closer at the very beginning of employment or that contract than ever before. They're going to have this interpretation. You start with a blank slate, and once you start, they're looking at you. So whether they think you're a hard worker, a lazy worker, or someone that's creative, not creative, whatever, that interpretation of you kind of gets set, and it's hard to change. So keep that in mind whenever you go to work for a company, that you want to look for opportunities to be the best you can be. That doesn't mean go in on day one and try to change everything. Go in, listen, learn, but make sure you ask the right questions on expectations. What did people before you, even in an interview, what did the best person who took this job, what did they do to make them stand out? The people that have not been considered successful or may have even been terminated, what did they do that really resulted in that termination? That's what the recruiters, the people at the organization, those are the type of questions they love to hear, because they know you're thinking about it the right way. So you ask a question, How could I succeed and be the best at this job? And that is called organizational citizenship. So a test question, just to let you know, you may get a question that says, which of the following is the best example of organizational citizenship? Keeping informed of your company's shifting goals, because they're always changing. So if you want to be a great citizen of the organization, always know where that target is. And when it's moving, when it's shifting, you need to realize that has shifted, that target has shifted. Personnel, not personal, but personnel, like HR, human resources, psychology. Companies can enhance their chances of developing a positive organizational culture by actually hiring and promoting the right people and putting them in the right jobs. Personnel psychology is actually really focused and concerned about the testing, selection, placement, and promotion of people. So we're going to look at just real quick the 3 different factors, key factors in this decision-making process of placing people in the right job. The first thing is job analysis. The second is selection procedures. And the third is performance appraisals. Those are 3 key ingredients for making sure you have the right people in the right jobs. So personnel selection, that begins with job analysis. Write that down. Personnel selection begins with a job analysis, which is a detailed description of the skills, the knowledge, and the activities required by a particular job. A job analysis, it could be done by interviewing expert workers that have done that job or doing that job right now, by giving them a questionnaire, or directly observing their work, or identify critical incidents. And the second thing, what you see that on the screen, a critical incident, that's actually a situation or situations with which competent employees must be able to cope. So whenever the bad things happen, these critical incidents, a great employee should be able to handle that and rectify that problem. The ability to deal with these situations also calmly with kind of a mechanical emergency, for example, is one of the examples in the book. Think about airline pilots, or even think about everything going on in the airline industry now. Almost every time you turn on the news, it seems like a plane has had a near crash or almost ran off a runway. But once job requirements are known, say like for pilots, the psychologist then can state what the skills are, the aptitudes, that's the intelligence, and the interest, what are needed for someone to do well in that one job. And then the third thing, some psychologists are really now doing a broader work analysis. And in this case, they try to identify general characteristics that a person must have to succeed in a variety of roles rather than just one specific job. I wanted to add here for you to write down, because there's a question on the test. It's only in the book and you may have missed it, but when conducting a work analysis, they gave kind of an example, and they said IO psychologists, it's important for IO psychologists to remember that when behavior patterns are changing over time, and they were using the example in space stations, being able to control one's environment helps to lower stress. So that's kind of common sense, right? If you can control your one environment, if it's out of your control, that's going to make it very stressful. I mean, it's just kind of common sense. But just remember that question, because you may get that on the test. So after desirable skills and traits are identified, let's say by the IO psychologist to the employer, the next step, so they did the analysis, that was the first step. The next step is to learn who has these skills. Today, the methods often used for evaluating job candidates includes collecting their biodata. Now, this is something really interesting, something to write down. And they do that, they conduct interviews, giving standardized psychological tests, and employing the assessment center approach. So let's talk about each one of those that I just mentioned briefly. Biodata is, as simple as that may seem or sound, a good way to predict job success is to collect that detailed biographical information. That's what biodata is, biographical information. So in an employment setting, the biodata is most often used with the understanding that past behavior is a good way to predict future behavior. That's something to write down. Past behavior predicts future behavior. If they were good in the past, they'll probably be good at this too. But if they failed, it's, do they have a tendency to give up? Or are they, or are they working, if they work well with people in one environment, they're probably going to work well in another environment. That's just kind of what that means. So by learning, in a detailed way about a person's life and their past, it's often possible to determine whether the person is suited for a particular type of work. Some of the most useful items in biodata include, of course, especially for athletes too, past athletic interests, academic achievements. And even if they're not an athlete, but they're in a sales or competitive, it's that competitiveness that we're looking for in that biodata. Their academic achievements, their scientific interest, extracurricular activities, religious activities could even be a part of that. Social popularity, conflict with, their siblings growing up, or attitudes towards school and parents' socioeconomic status, all those kind of things, believe it or not, they come into play. Now, the problem with a lot of that biodata is it's really, it could be very illegal to even ask these questions in an environment. So what IO psychologists have to do when you look at testing a type of method is find way, they're asking questions in a certain way that may give you some of that information, but in a legal way. Not saying, hey, did your parents abuse you, or was your brother horrible to you as a child? You're not going to get questions like that, but it just asks there's certain personality traits and characteristics or questions you can ask that's going to come out. So those are the civil liberty and privacy concerns too, relating to the collection of that sensitive biodata. So we have to make sure that we are abiding by all those laws. Such facts can also tell us a lot about their personality, their interests, their abilities, in addition to their past experiences. A person's recent life activities also predict job success. For instance, you may think that college grades are not important, but I'll tell you, a college grade point average, it does predict success in a lot of types of work. So employers are going to look at your GPA often to see how well you did when you were in school. Another factor, of course, is in collecting data is the interview process. There's a traditional personal interview. It's still one of the most popular ways to select people for jobs or promotions. But in a personal interview, the job applicants are kind of you'd be questioned about your qualifications, your experiences. At the same time, the interviewers are gaining an impression of your own personality to see how well you may fit within that work group. But here's the problem with interviews, and this is something to write down too, that they're subject to the halo effect. So if you remember that in the prior chapters, that's the tendency of the interviewer. So if I were interviewing you, and if you remind me of my best friend who I think is amazing, then I may have this halo effect that you're also like him or her, but you may not be. So there's where that halo effect, if they remind you of someone, then, and it could be in a bad way too, they may remind you of someone you really don't like, and you're going to kind of put that on them when they could be a great person for this job. So there's that halo effect. In addition, the interviewees, if you were the interviewee and I was the interviewer, you also are engaging in something called impression management. And that's where you're trying to give your best to me as the interviewer. And so that impression management's another thing, realizing that's their best and it may not be exactly who they are. And we have to realize that as an interviewer. So for the test, you need to know, for example, like deciding to dress in your most professional outfit before you go to a meeting with a recruiter. It's a great example of engaging in impression management. So by what you wear, you want to be the best, and it may not be something you wear that often. You may put on a tie and you don't wear a tie very often. That's called impression management. Just realize that for the test. So there are also different types of psychological tests that are used for personnel selection, and there's a lot of different type of tests. But the first type of test that may be used is one that assesses your general mental ability. That's, of course, we covered that in Chapter 9. That's an intelligence test. In Section 9.1, we discuss the fact that although these tests have limitations, they can be useful for predicting success in some areas, including those related to work. Second, personnel psychologists make use of certain personality tests, which assess traits such as, if you remember the big five, agreeableness, conscientiousness, extroversion, neuroticism, which of course negative emotionality is what it's called now. And so that's a part of the Big Five. And also the Hexaco model, if you remember that, was discussed in section 12, if you did read it, which added another trait to the Big Five. So personality traits, they're important in determining a person's ability to work successfully in a particular job, but they're also useful for predicting the extent to which a person will get along with the other team members and organizational leaders, because a leader may manage in a certain way that, you may really like, or it may rub you the wrong way. And it doesn't mean you're not a great worker. It just means that you're not motivated the way that that leader is. So that's where the IO psychologist would come in and try to move people around to put them in the right work group. So it's called leader-member exchange theory. Leader-member exchange theory. It suggests that there is a two-way relationship that develops between leaders and workers, and it's associated with mutual trust and respect. And consequently, it has important implications for productivity and job satisfaction. And we'll talk in a moment about the Ivy Consulting Group Big Five for Work that I built and created. It's based on that theory. And so there's also, before we move on, a third type of test that's often used for personnel psychologists, and it's called a vocational interest test. And these tests assess the person's interest and matches them with interest found among successful workers in various occupations. There's a really big one used for the U.S. government, the military, that they use one. And it's to try to match someone with the right job. So again, aptitude test, that's a fourth type of test that you already know about, but it's used by personnel psychologists, and that rates the person's potential to learn tasks or skills for various occupations quickly. And these tests kind of will test for clerical, verbal, mechanical, artistic, legal, medical aptitudes, and a lot of others. An example is if someone observes your oral communication skills when they're having a conversation with you, that can actually be considered an aptitude test, and also one you may want to know for your test, your quiz this week. So if an example of an aptitude test could be someone observing your oral communication skills. After college, there's a chance you're going to encounter a fifth means of testing potential employees, and that's at an assessment center. That's very weird how that's mentioned in the book. They call it a fifth means of testing potential employees, and it's not a test at all. It's actually where you do it. It's an assessment center. And many large organizations use assessment centers to do in-depth evaluations of job candidates. And it also, while it's expensive, it's a lot cheaper than trying to do that all in-house. So they send you out to an expert before they hire you. And when they like you, they'll spend the extra money to have a third party say, yes, we believe this is a good fit or not a good fit. Because the cost of a bad hire is astronomical. So assessment centers, they also perform what's referred to as an in-basket test. There's a couple of questions that are rotating on our quiz this week that refers to in-basket tests. And that actually, you're evaluating someone on how they manage their day-to-day work, on how they're managing, that work. And think of an in-basket. And that's an old terminology when we used to have thousands of papers on our desk and an in basket. So a file clerk would go around and take them from one department to the next, and they're transferring the work in paper before computers, of course. It's still called an in basket test. Now it should be an inbox for email. But an example is whenever someone says, read this stack of memos and propose a course of action. So here are a bunch of memos. How would you handle this work? And that's called an in basket test. Or the assessment center can create situational tests to simulate group decision-making and problem-solving, and that's referred to as a leaderless group discussion. So a lot of these are really becoming popular when the groups are actually working together, and there's no really designated leader, because they don't want someone to take on the role of leader and everyone else follower. This is especially when there's creativity is needed. They'll call it a leaderless group, saying, hey, come here in the safe place. Let's just throw any idea together and really think out of the box to try to solve a problem. And that's actually called, it's a situational test, a test. It's where it simulates a group decision-making and problem-solving process referred to as leaderless group discussion. So just food for thought. You can read that, but I'm not going to read it right now because I want to get on to specific test questions, and as I'm sure you want as well. A performance appraisal. This is one thing I've got to admit, a lot of small companies fail to do this or at all, or they fail to do it the right way. A performance appraisal, this is key to a company's success, and you can evaluate. I mentioned that earlier, what you can't measure. So evaluating the performance after a person has been hired is what's referred to as once they're on the job. Now we are evaluating their performance, and we're going to do it in a structured type of way. And it's important to know too, immediate feedback from that supervisor or team leader. It's crucial with goal setting and also for determining rewards or punishments, often being used to encourage performance. And there's a type of performance appraisal called a 360 degree feedback. And it's evaluation of that employer, that worker performance from a variety of perspectives. It's not just your group evaluating each other. This could be from people that are customers, from the top leaders, from people that work for you, work with you. I mean, it's giving you, everyone that you come in contact with can evaluate, and sometimes even a customer, if you do customer service, to put that all together to give you a great idea of how well you're doing or how well maybe you're not doing. And it may also include a self-assessment. And that's what I make sure to do when I'm recommending to most companies is a performance appraisal process. I recommend they start it with a self-report. So that person will report on what they think they did right or wrong during, let's say, that month. And they see their prior month and what the goals were set for the next month. It's real black and white. Did you achieve these goals? Why or why not? What prevented you? Or, what do you credit for actually meeting these goals? And so they're evaluating their own performance, and then that self-review comes to the supervisor or team leader that can either agree or disagree with that information, but it becomes a very viable and effective way to not only measure performance, but improve employee engagement, to make sure too that they're understanding the goals of the organization and hopefully remain focused on achieving that goal. So with this is important too for the test. 360 degree feedback is the most likely method that would reveal employee strengths and weaknesses. Write that down. So now we look at job satisfaction. Job satisfaction is really a crucial ingredient for that, is getting the right people in the right positions. So whenever I'm working with an organization, I'm looking for, I may have the right person. And really what the right person means that they fit in well, let's say with the organizational culture, they're smart enough, they've got a good attitude. That's a big one. If they have a bad attitude, they just don't like it there, they're probably not going to work in any team. Doesn't matter where they're at. So I'm looking for attitude first, then skill set, because I can train the skill set, but I can't teach attitude. If they have a bad attitude, why even go any further? Talk them into hopefully a job at a different company, a competitor. But the other thing is can they do the job? And then also, are they happy in that job? Is it something that really excites them? And, there's this one thing, and we'll get into it in a minute, called flow, but it's where that person's ability and their job strengths or their interest, everything has this perfect balance where it does motivate them because it stretches what they can do, but it's not too much and it's not too boring. So that's what we're looking for, to have that right balance. So there's always, you try to look for a good fit between the work required and their own characteristics, it says on that second bullet point, but it's also their ability. And that includes their interests, values, abilities, and then expectations of the employee being managed while still meeting the needs of the employer. So these are all key things of job satisfaction. And then in this second slide, this actually should say job enrichment. It's not, but just write this down. But with regard to like salary expectations and the need for a challenge, they tend to, the trend in business has historically kind of focused on simply trying to if you're going to give them more pay, then they're going to produce more. And that's not always the case. A lot of time they need some challenging work also. But however, too many jobs are so routine and repetitive, they're boring, and they don't need, they don't meet the need for challenge or personal growth. And also those jobs that are very repetitive, routine, those are also ones you've got to look at. Can AI do this? that may be eliminated one day. But so IO psychologists will come in and they want to look for something called, recommend a strategy that will improve job enrichment. And that job enrichment, it really involves making a job more personally rewarding or interesting. And this also can lower your production cost, increase job satisfaction, reduce the boredom of your people, and decrease absenteeism. Because if they like their work, they're most likely going to show up on time. So if they feel good and they feel like they're rewarded and it's just the right amount of challenge for them, then that's really a perfect combination. But if workers are also, and this is what happens in a lot of organizations, they just think someone can do it all and they have too few workers and they just throw it all on one person, and that's called overload. And overloaded workers, they can handle it for short periods of time, but over a long period of time, they get very stressed and then they start making more errors, they get fatigued, and their productivity crashes. So these enrichment strategies from IO psychologists really involve removing some of the controls and restrictions on employees and giving also those employees greater freedom of choice and authority to kind of do the work how they know they need to get it done. So that's a really big part of enrichment, but also in that employee engagement is autonomy of work. And that autonomy of work means, hey, I know you know how to get this done, just get it done. I don't care how you get it done, just get it done. So that's another important part of this factor of job satisfaction, job enrichment. And of course, also, again, remember, they need to have immediate feedback when things are going right or wrong. So now let's go on to, actually I did have the information on here. So let's see if I covered it all. Okay, so there are a couple of things that I kind of missed here that we need to cover. And let me just go ahead and finish the slide out there. Flexible working conditions, that's another thing that has been known, and this is all brand new after COVID, post-COVID, that people have found that will increase that employee enrichment engagement. Now, the problem is a lot of the employers haven't all been convinced that this is a good thing yet, but a lot of employees like it, the freedom to be able to work at home. So there's a couple of different definitions that are newer. And of course, they're kind of newer, kind of not, but they're more standardized now that we have flex time. So when you look at flex time is exactly what it sounds like. It's the start and the end times are flexible. You can just get your job done. It's not always possible to give flex time to a lot of employees where they can just get their job done. If they're in customer service and, a company needs you to be on the phones or be there when customers call or those high periods of time, then, it may not be flexible as much, but also flex time does mean what most employers are doing, say, listen, tell us when you can work, but when you say you can work, that's when you have to work. It's not like you can just, but true flex time means you just kind of work when you just get your job done. And, and those are usually salaried employees. They're not hourly. They don't have to keep track of their time, but they have to keep track of their results, and it's a performance-based usually position, which can be stressful, but it also, for some people, they love it that way because they can get their done in a shorter amount of hours and they have the freedom to choose when they're working their hardest. And then of course we have flex place, and that flex place is really something about where it's effective when it allows like your employees to maintain, let's say, an office in their home or in other cities rather than being, you see Google had done that for, the last few years since COVID, and where they're not being forced to move to that company's headquarters or location, and they actually did a survey after COVID-19 after that, and they surveyed 3,000 people, and 77% said they wanted to continue working for home at least part-time after the restrictions had been lifted and the company wanted them to come back. And 16% indicated they would prefer not to return to the office at all. And if they required them to, they'd probably quit. And we did see that happen. So whether it's enhanced by job enrichment, flexible working conditions, or by some other means, job satisfaction is definitely well worth cultivating this as an employer, because the positive attitudes toward work are associated with more cooperation, better performance, a greater willingness to help others, and more creative problem solving and less absenteeism. So it's a good thing for companies. And here's something important for your test. Absenteeism is most closely linked with low job satisfaction. So in other words, if you see someone is not coming in, it is highly, highly correlated to that person is just not satisfied with their job. Something's going wrong. A great example of just a couple of examples could be on your test. Example of flex time could be when you choose to work 10 hours per day so you can get Fridays off. So 10 hours per day, Monday through Thursday, and then get Friday off. That is a good example of flex time. A great example of flex place is when you have the option of working from home or you create a professional office in your home that you can control. So I don't know why that's separate in the book, but that was a separate thing. So didn't understand it? Rewind it, listen to it again. Making a job more personally rewarding, interesting, or intrinsically motivating refers to job enrichment. Okay, so let's look at leadership in organizations. So when we look at that, we've got two different type of leaders. We have a theory X leader and a theory Y. You probably read about that in the book. I hope you did, because there are a lot of questions on the test that may be on theory X and theory Y, and you need to understand this. If you remember, we talked about Abraham Maslow, his hierarchy of needs, and we also talked about Frederick Taylor's scientific management and work efficiency model. If you remember those two models, that's where the Frederick Taylor scientific management, that work efficiency model, how can we get this done as efficient as possible? Efficient also means cheap, to be productive and profitable. There was a professor from MIT back in the 1960s, probably over a couple of decades, and his name's Douglas McGregor. He basically stole these two concepts, and that's where he created the theory X type of leader. So this theory X, again, it's based on really Taylor's scientific management approach, and it describes people whose motivation to work, it's driven by the extrinsic factors. That is a paycheck, something outside of their body that they want, like money or compensation. And they're going to be likely to avoid taking responsibility, having little ambition, generally work only because they need their wages to meet Maslow's basic need for survival. So Theory X leaders use an approach that emphasizes work efficiency to get the maximum result for the minimum or cheapest effort. It's all about efficiency. So think about this with Theory X. Those leaders believe that workers really are lazy. They don't care. All they want to do is get a paycheck. That's what a Theory X leader has. And because of that, why are we going to be dedicated to making them happy and everything else? Just get their job done, do what they're told to do, and we're going to do it as cheaply as possible. So know that. And then, of course, there is a contrasting theory that is a Theory Y leader. And this is more of Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory, is more of the Theory Y. And it applies to workers who are kind of intrinsically motivated to work and whose jobs allow them to meet the higher level needs, including the need for personal growth. A good example of someone trying to motivate as a Theory Y leader would be if you would give a raise to an employee who took it upon himself or herself to kind of streamline the company's internal review process. So again, look at that Theory X. He said that combine these two different theories, Theory X. This is what the Theory Y is again. That is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And then we're going to also look at Theory X as more of a Frederick Taylor scientific management work efficiency to create this model. This is what he did. And so just get to know that a little bit, and know for like a test question, it may say, which of the following is approach to leadership that emphasizes work efficiency? What do you think that would be? You should know the answer. Which of the following is the best example of a Theory Y leader? And if someone maybe gives a raise to someone because they took it upon themselves to streamline the company's internal review process or do something else that improved it, and it's taking that upon themselves, they're motivated intrinsically, that's going to be the Theory Y. So when we get into human diversity and leadership, a person-oriented Theory Y leadership style, they have become increasingly more popular. People are looking more for these theory-wide leaders that understand that look for the intrinsic motivators in people. This is about selecting the right person that's internally, intrinsically motivated. That's what we're looking for in a lot of these different type of jobs. But there's, as that's been happening, we're seeing that there's something that you've probably read about called a glass ceiling. There's a glass ceiling where women's wages that it's been better and better. It's not where it needs to be, not even close, especially if you watch the basketball, the WNBA showing the discrepancy between female basketball players. And there's reasons for it, of course, but I mean, huge discrepancies. That's called the glass ceiling. But there's also been, as women are kind of gaining this acceptance as leaders, and, they're still not paid the same proportion as male leaders, but it is increasing. But some studies show that companies with more women in leadership roles perform better financially and when managing their employees. So female managers, even though a lot of research shows that they're better leaders and people are more receptive to a female leader, they're still not paid as much. So there's one report in the book you may have read about. It's a psychologist, Alice Egley. And she noted that women continue to face unique challenges, including those created by a clash between leadership stereotypes and the stereotypes of women. So on one hand, she said, most people expect good leaders to be agentic. That's meaning they're independent, confident, ambitious, objective, dominant, and forceful. But on the other hand, they expect women to be. So that's the leadership expectation. But when it comes to women, they expect women to be more communal. That means and a communal type person is more of a person who's dependent, caring, nurturing, tender, sensitive, and sympathetic. So do you see the problem there? So there's, according to the traditional gender role stereotypes, some believe it's men who are more agentic. They think that men would be better leaders because they're more agentic. And, despite that, a lot of the research and evidence shows the opposite. So what does that mean for a woman who moves into a leadership role? If she's continuing to practice, according to the psychologist, if that female leader continues to practice being a communal or theory-wide leader, then she's kind of seen as weak. That's a problem. She's not tough enough or doesn't have the right stuff to be a leader. Yet if she acts more assertively, what's needed and viewed as a better leader in that role, then she's kind of questioned for being too much like a man or trying to act like a man or being kind of, the B word is what you hear quite often. And so, but hopefully as we're moving forward, as traditional gender stereotypes kind of fade, we'll see the theory-wide leadership styles are going to gain wider acceptance, especially for females, that it's not as much. Most females have to have that perfect combination of X and Y. And people will see men and women as equal. We're just hoping that happens. Who knows how long it'll take. But for the test, just know that according to Egley, in the context of leadership, most people expect women in particular, not necessarily men, to be more communal. They expect that, more communal. They expect women to be that way. And it's not always a good thing. Now let's talk about transformational leadership. And what that means is that transformational leader, it seeks to transform employees to exceed expectations and looks beyond self-interest to help the organization better compete. That's kind of tough. You see a lot of leaders, they focus on their own interests, their salaries, what they want, all these different benefits. You see this too in sports and athletics. It happens all the time. And transformational leadership is really that type of leader who kind of puts that off to the side for the benefit of the team to help the organization be better. So a transformational leader achieves these, the highest goals in the following ways. They idealized influence. Employees are encouraged to work ethically, emphasizing values such as trust. That's a big deal. Number two, they use inspirational motivation. Employees are inspired to see their work as meaningful and challenging. That's really the key to a lot of companies' success. If the company can't believe in the product that you're selling or the service that you're offering, how in the world are they going to be successful in delivering a great service or a great product? They have to, but if they see that it's meaningful, that it's helping people, they're going to be very motivated to achieve a great product. And then there's intellectual stimulation. With this type of transformational leader, employees are empowered to kind of think outside the box, allowed to fail, try and find solutions to problems without thinking there'll be a negative repercussion if they're not right. And then there's individualized consideration. And that's where employees have, you know that they have their own individual needs and goals and abilities. And a transformational leader values that. And they have appropriate professional development, can help the employee achieve his or her goals, and knowing that when they achieve their goals, they're going to do better as an organization. That's what a transformational leader is. There are two techniques that make transformational leadership and theory Y, specifically methods, effective, and it's shared leadership and management by objectives. You probably heard of both of those. Management by objectives have been around forever. But shared leadership, or you'll hear also it called percipitive management, where employees that are at all levels are directly involved in decision making and problem solving. Sounds like chaos, doesn't it? And a lot of times it can be. By taking part in decisions that affect them, employees come to see work as a cooperative effort. So it's not as something imposed. They need to not see it as their work is something that they have to do. They actually see it as that their voice is heard. It matters. Their opinion matters. And I can tell you a lot of times companies will kind of fake this, and it's not hard to see, but the companies will say, hey, we're going to do this big survey. We're going to talk to leaders. And then what they basically do is they roll out these new programs, and we talk to all the leaders in the organization, and this is what they said you needed. We listened to you, we heard you, and this is what we're rolling out. When really they already had it. I've been parts of those groups before on both sides of that equation. And you kind of, if it's done as fake, then it can really rebound the wrong way and really have a really negative effect on an organization. But if you're doing this in the right ways, shared leadership where it's truly listening to your people, there are a lot of benefits, including like greater productivity, more involvement in employees being involved in work. They have greater work satisfaction and less job-related stress. So on the test, a good example of shared leadership is where all employees kind of decide on retirement benefits. So they're all saying, hey, what do you want for retirement? They throw in their opinions, and that's what the company creates. That would be a good example. And of course, we have management by objectives. That refers to like a situation where workers are given specific goals to meet so they can tell whether they're doing a good job or not. So typical objectives include like reaching a certain sales total, making certain number of items, or reducing waste by a specific percentage. So that objective is you put the goal out there first, and then as a team, you're kind of managing that to say, okay, if we're going to hit that goal, here are the things that each of us have to do and how the team has to succeed. And when the team succeeded, then all of us our entire company goal will be met. In any case, workers are kind of free to choose within limits, of course, but how they're going to achieve their goals. That's the important thing. Workers are free to choose how they actually get this work done. As a result, they're going to feel more independent, take personal responsibility for their work, or the company blames them when it doesn't work. But workers are especially productive when they receive feedback. Again, feedback about their progress toward these goals. And clearly, people like to know what the target is and whether they're succeeding. Even if you don't have a small office with a couple of people, you're like, well, I talk to them every day. Well, no, they like you to meet with them, provide goals, and get feedback on a consistent basis. So many companies give groups of workers even greater freedom and responsibilities than individuals. So they're going to give the work group, they let the work group and this is what you're seeing in these remote teams, or, where teams are working all over the world, but they're coming together for this certain project. And the company's not going to go and watch the meetings or attend these meetings. They're relying on these work groups to hold each other accountable or responsible for their own performance. And that's what's called a self-managed team. And that is a group of employees. They work together for that shared goal or goals. And they typically choose their own methods of achieving results. It's totally up to them. So as long as that they're effective, hey, get the job done or you're gone. That's really kind of how it works. And these self-managed teams tend to make good use of strengths and talents of individual employees. And at the end of these these projects, for instance, they may do a performance review and evaluate each other and say, this person did great, this person didn't, and they rank their own performance and their team members. And that's kind of how the organization knows who actually did a great job and who doesn't do a great job. So then you ask the question, how can workers below the management level, so these teams, how can they be involved more in their work? One answer is to use quality circles, voluntary discussion groups like brainstorming sessions that kind of seek ways to solve the business problem and improve efficiency. Write that down, what I just said. In contrast to self-managed teams, the quality circles, they usually don't have the power to put the suggestions into practice directly, but they have good ideas, and they speak for themselves, and many are adopted by the leaders, but not necessarily. There's no guarantee. A quality circle do have limitations, but nevertheless, studies verify that greater personal involvement can lead to better performance and job satisfaction. So even though we've only scratched the surface of IO psychology, we've got to kind of move on to environmental psychology because we're already about an hour into this. And before we begin, it's a chance to do some reflective practices on what you've learned. So just a couple of little quick things, questions you may want to know. Which of the following scenarios shows shared leadership? All employees decide on retirement benefits. Already covered that. Which of the following is best described as a quality circle? Volunteers at a company who brainstorm together on how to maximize company output. There's no reason why you should miss questions on these tests, quite frankly. As long as you do the work, read the chapter first time, listen to this, take notes, you're always going to do well. So here's a couple of other questions and answered. Which leadership theory assumes people enjoy autonomy on the job and are willing to accept responsibility? So theory X again was, do you remember that, Frederick Taylor? That was the get the job done for the employees don't care or whatever. But theory Y actually does say that leadership refers to managers who adopt this person orientation. They want to achieve great goals. Yeah, that's my back scratcher. Man, that helps a lot while I'm working in a chair all day. But they believe workers enjoy the autonomy, willing to accept responsibility. That's the theory X leader. So let's talk about environmental psychology. Much of our behavior is influenced by specific types of environments. That's like a team environment or home environment as a child, whatever. But for example, like a variety of environmental factors influence the amount of, say, vandalism and other crime that occurs in public places was the example in the book. Knowing that the environment can shape our behavior, researchers often concern themselves with questions about how local environments should be designed to encourage desired behavior. So that was all what we talked about before. And, you know, and there were some examples in the book about shopping malls, department stores. They kind of put you in a maze. And so because they want you to see certain things as you're walking through the store, or the grocery store puts the milk in the very back because they know most people come in for milk. They want you to walk and see all the other items before you get to the milk and hopefully pick something else up. Or a casino doesn't put a clock on the wall because they want you to gamble all night. So it's the environment that they're trying to encourage you or get you to buy things. Or some of those shops that make you wait in line for a long time and they put stuff in the line. So especially the stuff at the kids' eye level where they're like, can I get this? Can I get it? And you just want to shut the kid up so you buy them something extra. That's what they're hoping for, our weak parents. But that's environmental psychology. So in one thing too, there's an ecological footprint that impacts, you know, the impact that we have on our natural environment. Not going to get into too much of that. Read it for the test. But the one thing that is in that book that I saw a question on that, you know, it asked what has been linked to children's poor reading skills, what in their environment. And the example was actually in the book, living near airports. That actually was directly linked to children's poor reading skills. Go figure, the loud environment, the distractions. So environmental influences, again, on behavior. There's other things that influence specific environments, the crime rates, shopping malls. I just already talked about that, not going to go over it again. And so what are some of the aspects of an environment that impact our thoughts, emotions, behavior? Additional things are traffic congestion, pollution, crime, urban problems that you kind of come to mind. And psychologists, though, when we talk about a work environment, they're looking similar to that environment in a living area, but where you work, there could be crowding, where you just feel too confined and too many people around and all the confusion or distractions. Overstimulation and noise factors all influence worker behavior. So the first step, when we're looking at environmental psychology, is to conduct an environmental assessment. Makes sense, right? Which is basically the measurement and the analysis of the effects that our environment has on behavior and the perceptions of people within that environment. It could even be the color of the room or the paintings on the wall. Those kind of things do affect maybe our behavior. And so that's what an organizational psychologist would look at. In the book also, when we look at crowding and you see what crowding is, I'm not going to explain it. You don't need me to explain what you're seeing there on the screen. But a test question could be, how can an organization best deal with desk rage? If you remember reading the story in the book about desk rage, about people just lose their mind, and you've probably seen it kind of funny videos if no one gets hurt, but sometimes do get hurt, or they throw their computer out of a window or off at the top of a building. And the one thing they found that an organization can do with people like that, other than firing them, which can really come back and haunt you, but it's express sincere gratitude for everyone's efforts. And that's part of that culture. So if you're constantly, as an organization or even as a parent, talked about this in psychology, all too often we're looking for the things that people do wrong and we're pointing it out. And research has shown whatever you point out, they're going to repeat. So if you're only pointing out bad things, they're going to keep repeating bad behavior because that's better than ignoring them. So what you have to do is to counteract that is to point out good behavior. And that's not something that comes natural to most people. If everything's good, part of our human nature and habits, we then forget about it, right? It's only when things are not good that it causes that stress, and that causes the behavior or the reaction. So you have to be very mentally aware of this and take note, especially if you're a manager, leader of an organization, to look for the things that they do right and express the gratitude for their hard work, the gratitude for good work. That's a real important thing to affect that overstimulation and noise too. So what is meant by attentional overload? You probably know it's just a stressful condition caused when sensory stimulation, our senses, all that information that we're taking in and our social contacts make excessive demands on our attention. That's what that attentional overload is. All that attention, everyone's wanting us to do something. And so read a little bit about that. Not going to get into it, but there was, if you remember overstimulation, you probably remember Stanley Milgram. He talks about this a lot. I think he's also the one that did the marshmallow effect, if you remember that. But that he really looked at the from large cities and kind of related some of that research to an environment at work, which result in the sensory and cognitive overload at work and how they can have a negative impact on performance. But he did most of his work with children that had disabilities or had learning disabilities because of this overstimulation in these suburban compared to the urban, these inner city problems based on that environment is what he looked at. So how do you manage that? There's methods that are adopted psychologists may use to find solutions, such as overcrowding, pollution, overuse of resources. That's going to just be called environmental assessment that I mentioned earlier. But you may also find a term called architectural psychology. And that's just the study of effects that buildings have on our behavior and the design of the buildings inside the building using behavioral principles. So think of the architectural psychology, how things are designed, the architecture of the room, the environment, the building, everything. That is architectural psychology. Not going to get into that, but just know what that is. Overpopulation, environmental impact, that of course is overcrowding too. You read about that in the book, but there's some environmental consequences too that you can read about. I'm not going to get into it too much, but there could be a question on the test, but I just don't offhand remember one. Sources of environmental damage. Many problems that we face today are traced back to our tendency to kind of overuse natural resources. We know that. Given that corporations and governments are actually doing a significant amount of the environmental damage, many of the solutions require changes in politics and policies. So know that what a social dilemma is, and that's in the tragedy of of the commons is what it referred to. These highlight the challenges posed by individual actions that contribute to environmental damage. So you need to understand these concepts. It's crucial so we can have sustainable and responsible use of our resources. A social dilemma, it refers to a social situation that tends to provide immediate rewards for actions that will have undesired effects in the long run. It can also be said to be a pattern of behavior that contributes to many environmental problems. So, in these situations, no individual intentionally acts against the group interest of, say, climate change or social and, type of problems. But collectively, everyone together, when we're all doing the same thing, then that's going to cause a big problem. It's like if there are too many people driving their own cars instead of using public transport systems. So as long as, if we have too many cars, there's no pollution in the air, but if enough people can take public transportation systems or have alternative methods or electric cars, then the environment could have a better or less environmental damage. So, and also the tragedy of commons, that definition on the screen, it's really a social dilemma where the individuals each acting on their immediate self-interest, but overuse a scarce group resource. Like, we think it's so limited, we go and get it and we want to use it because it's scarce and we want to have it before anyone else. And that leads to really long-term collective costs and negative environmental consequences. So you just need to know the definition of that. So there are a lot of solutions for environmental damage. Need to look at things as a group effort. If everyone together wants to make a difference, then that can help. Second, there's evidence it helps to rearrange rewards and costs for people. Like companies, if they're tempted to pollute because it saves them money, increase profits, then you penalize them for this kind of stuff, and they see that is directly adverse to their profits. And so you just look at this, and you can read more about that in the book. Personalized normative feedback, though, that last little bullet point, there may be a question on that, but it's kind of a persuasion technique. It seeks to change attitudes by comparing feedback about like individual performance with relevant social norms in order to foster compliance. This is what other people are doing, kind of thing. It's personalized normative. What is the norm? You're not the norm if you're not doing it. It's kind of what that means. So let's go into Unit 3, Legal Community and Sports Psychology. Real interesting when we get into sports psychology, but we're just going to take a very brief, look at this, each one of these different topics. Legal psychology, it refers kind of to the application of psychological science to the legal system. It covers the ways in which the law impacts people as well as how people influence the law. Like, for example, a legal psychologist might apply what's been learned about human development, memory, cognition to questions about like eyewitness testimony or children's ability to serve as a reliable witness. A related area of study you've all heard about, forensic psychology. It's focused more specifically on the clinical aspects of the law, like including competence evaluations for like criminals and other adults, counseling both victims of crime and people in prison, profiling criminals, and helping to select and train police cadets. That's an important one to remember too. So legal psychology describes the application of psychological science to law. Forensic psychology is the study of clinical aspects of the law. But also know that forensic psychology, it also includes helping to select and training police cadets. You may want to know that for the test. So we also know about jury selection and, about trials, how fascinating they could be, looking at human behavior and how that affects and how psychologists can come in and really help with that. And a lot of attorneys hire psychologists to come in and really evaluate different people and how a juror may act in a certain situation. So in that composition really of the jury, it has a major effect, of course, on the verdict of a trial, knowing the psychology behind each person, how they think. So before a trial begins, that the opposing attorneys they're allowed to question potential jurors. They come in and they're going to really seek to disqualify ones that they don't think that would share the same belief or what they're trying to prove. So because they know that people can be biased, everyone kind of has their own feelings or ideas about things. And if that's going to lead to what they believe to be an unfair trial, and really the only way to remove the ones who believe, they're just trying to believe the ones that aren't going to believe their argument, not to make it fair, they just want to win. But the juries, and one thing to look at, an example is like juries that are composed mainly of women are more likely to vote for conviction, let's say in a child assault trial. It's just a fact. It just happens. As the first step to looking at a jury selection, attorneys use the demographic information during that scientific jury selection because they have that before they even question them. So the first step, the attorneys use demographic information, and then during the scientific jury selection, and that scientific jury selection, what that means is really the attorneys are using social science principles to choose members of the jury. That's what that means. So when a case goes to trial, the jurors must listen to days, sometimes weeks or even months of testimony and then decide guilty or innocent. Psychologists have really conducted decades and decades of research to determine how jurors come up with the decisions they make. And the findings are actually kind of disturbing. You probably read about this in the book. And there's 4 different challenges that jurors have to overcome to reach really what's called a fair verdict. And these 4 things, you may want to know what they are. First, studies show that jurors who are rarely able to put aside their biases, their attitudes and values when they make a decision. So they're showing that. That's the first problem. They can't put those values and biases aside. It's very, very hard to do. For example, a lot of jurors judge people by appearance alone and are less likely to find attractive defendants guilty on the basis of the same evidence than unattractive defendants. In one mock jury study they had, defendants were less likely to be convicted if they were wearing basically eyeglasses than if they weren't, because a lot of people presume eyeglasses meant intelligence, and the defendants are less likely to do, they think that person would be less likely to commit a foolish crime if he or she was on trial. A second problem is that jurors are not very good at separating evidence from their perceptions of the people involved in the trial. It comes back to a lot of their biases, including the defendant, the attorneys, witnesses, and even the judge. For example, if there's a complex scientific, if evidence is presented, jurors tend to be swayed more by the expertise of the witness than by the evidence itself. Third, jurors tend to inappropriately incorporate information from pretrial publicity into their deliberations, often without being aware that it's happened. They may have heard about it on the news, they don't remember it, or they may hear something about it. So actually, when someone is selected, they keep them away from everything, social media, as much as they can, so that doesn't come into play. A fourth and final area of difficulty, in selecting a great trial to have a fair decision, it arises because a lot of the jurors usually can't suspend their judgment until all of the evidence is presented. They usually are going to form an opinion early on, and once that opinion is set, it's like what I mentioned on a job. When you get a job, once they think you're a hard worker or a lazy worker, it's kind of set, and it's hard to overcome that. The same thing happens in a jury. What they first believe, in most cases, it's not going to change, and that's very unsettling. To think that's why so many people are behind bars that probably shouldn't be. Community psychology. It's really a relatively new area of studies. It goes back in the U.S., can be traced back to the 1960s. At that time, there was a group of clinical psychologists. They gathered together and discussed their shared interest in developing an activist approach to health-related challenges, one that would move beyond traditional like psychotherapy, the couch therapy. So community psychologists, and it's relatively new again, and really have made a major positive change in the world. For example, community psychologists have worked on initiatives that promote environmental awareness and rural development, as well as positive experiences in schools, healthcare facilities, and the military. So they're looking at the groups, the community, and trying to think what can be done to make these communities more, happier, less stressed, as a group, instead of just looking at that individual person. So that's what that individual focus is on, normal psychology. And then when we get into that community focus, we're looking at the things that are going to emphasize different things, the culture, the economy, things like that are going to shape the health and well-being of the community. So now sports psychology, and it's a study of behavioral dimensions of sports performance. On a broad scale, psychological research provided valuable information on how sports can impact human functioning, even in a general population. For example, one study of adolescents found a link between sports participation and physical self-esteem that, in turn, was linked to overall self-esteem. So what it's saying is, even though we're talking about sports psychology, it doesn't mean you have to be an athlete for this to come into play. It just means sports in general. How does that impact when someone's involved in sports, in the competitive nature? It has an impact on our well-being and on our psychology. So there's a lot of research. In other research, some psychologists learned that like the benefits of sports are most likely to occur when there's competition, rejection, criticism, and the one winner mentality are minimized. So whenever, if it's just like a one winner take all, that's not going to have as much of a positive impact. You don't want to just have everyone gets a ribbon kind of thing. I think it's dependent on that child's age or the person's age as they progress. At the beginning, yes, have fun. Everyone gets a ribbon. No real winners, losers. But as they get older, I think it's important personally that you do have that. They do know, and it's okay because they're learning how to fail. And they're also realizing they're still going to be loved. They're still could be great. They just weren't the best that day. So adults, of course, they're also going to benefit from sports too. I like one of my favorite quotes is, I forgot who said it. It was a baseball player saying, we don't stop playing because we get old. We get old because we stop playing. And that's so true. Someone that's getting older, myself, you see that if you just get re-engaged and stay in sports, that you can live longer, have a more healthier lifestyle with that. It's just good for everyone. So what is sports psychology again? It's the study of psychological and behavioral dimensions of sports performance. Just realize that for your test. So as almost all serious athletes soon learn, especially those high performance, there is something called peak performance. And it requires more than physical training. It's mental, emotional conditioning are also very, very important. Recognizing this fact, many teams, both professional and amateur, with sports, and we'll show it how it's going to relate to work, that really affect everyone. And on many days, a sports psychologist might teach an athlete how to relax, but also how to ignore distractions or how to cope with emotions. Those are all important ingredients for peak performance. So an ability to do detailed studies of complex skills has been one of the major contributions of sports psychologists. In a task analysis, sports skills are kind of broken into subparts that key elements can be identified and taught. And there are several self-regulation strategies also that athletes use to maximize performance. That's like when someone's going to run, or the example on the screen is shooting at a target, that your heart's going to beat and it's going to flutter. And what they want to do is when someone like shooting a gun or even running, they want to do it when it comes down, and then they shoot at they know exactly when it's best to pull the trigger. And you see that first target, if they shoot when their heart rate goes up, they're most likely going to miss the target. But if they shoot when it's after and then they let it relax and they know how to control that heart rate, everything is perfect and they'll shoot a bullseye. And runners realize this too with their breathing right before a race. You can have all that energy is great to have and all that stress, but right before, it's the deep breath, the relaxation, let out the bad air, and to take off very, very quickly is an important thing. So that's where it comes to psychological science with elite athletes comes into play. So when we talk about flow, I mentioned that earlier. Think about have you ever been in the flow, where that is a state, and think about it from sports perspective first. It's easier, where like basketball, where you just can't miss. You just shoot it, and every single time it's in the basket. And this also is a state of flow, or what this definition of a state of flow, it means that you're so completely absorbed in an activity, you actually can lose track of time. The self-consciousness, that awareness of everything around you kind of fades away, and you're locked in, focused, and engaged. And it's seriously one of the most interesting topics in sports psychology, and it's the phenomenon of peak performance is that flow. And that, and during it, just remember again, it's the physical, mental, emotional states are all harmonious and optimal. A lot of athletes, when they're in this, they report that they felt like they're almost in a trance. They experience, it's also been called flow a lot because their performance kind of flows with this experience. And at that time, athletes kind of experience intense concentration, detachment from even body, a lack of fatigue and pain. They don't feel it. And a slowing of time where they're so focused, time slows down. And they have unusual feelings of like power and control. It's that time where their personal best occurs. But flow isn't only happening again in sports. It can happen in school, at your work, too. And there's a way to control arousal, and that is to go through a fixed routine before each game or event. A second method is to use imagery and relaxation techniques to adjust your degree of arousal. Like for basketball that I mentioned earlier, they had this one research experiment where they put a bunch of players and they would shoot baskets over and over, and they looked at the percentage before practice and after practice and what is the percentage of made free throws. And they had another group, all they did was this visualization technique. And the crazy thing was the people that had the visualization technique was almost as good an improvement as the ones who actually did it. It was neck and neck. That just tells you the power of thinking and visualization can have on your ability to succeed. But here's something to know too for the test. And this is kind of the catch-22, if you know what a catch-22 is. You cannot force it to happen. In fact, a person who stops to think about flow is actually, that flow state goes away. It's gone. You can't even think about it. That's a very important thing to know, probably a test question. But psychologists are looking, why does this happen, to find what kind of conditions that have to be there to facilitate this peak performance and keep you from thinking about it thing. So if you see on the screen, this is, I can't never pronounce this person's name, Russian psychologist and researcher Chimanovsky or something, I believe. I can't remember his name, but what he talked about in a flow zone, and think about this, and this is in a work performance, that if there's too much anxiety, if the task is the difficulty of a task and your capability, if it's too difficult, that can really cause anxiety, especially over a long period of time. So you don't want to get it in that anxiety. It can occasionally do that and come back, like little spurts of it, but it can't be there too long. The task can't be too difficult every single day. It'll cause undue amounts of stress, anxiety, and low performance. And if the task doesn't challenge you at all, then you're going to be bored with it and you're not going to be engaged. So it's this perfect balance of like testing you and not being boring that can create that flow zone. That's one thing. So it can, just know some of the stuff on the screen, read about it. Here are a couple of things to know that the test may ask you. Performance during which physical, mental, and emotional states are harmonious and optimal is referred to as peak performance. What happens when someone begins to think about flow? Stops immediately. What is the result of athletes using self-regulation strategies? Their performance remains at optimal levels. Unit 4. If you've been reading this textbook and you have as a first-year student, chances are by the end of your degree, once you go to college, you're in college and you're taking all your courses, it's going to seem a long way off maybe from now, and worrying about job security is probably the last thing on your mind. But the reality, though, is it's never too early to start preparing for the steps that will help you after graduation. Thinking about everything we're talking about in career preparation, to start thinking about, if you don't know the career that you want to be, don't just let that happen. If you don't listen to anything else I say, please listen to this when it comes to your work. Understand what will make you happy, but don't just follow your dreams. You need to follow the money, follow the opportunity, because what makes you happy may not be a great opportunity. And if you're okay not making any money or having to finance or take care of a family, then you may have the opportunity to do that. But most people don't. You do have to have some source of income. So try to, what the goal is, to find that opportunity to make money and have it match, take that passion with you. Try to find a career. So in other words, for years, I was in the insurance business. You think, how in the world are you going to really get excited about the insurance business, especially when really, when I was very young, I wanted to be a preacher. I just wanted to help people. And, and I was in training one time, and my manager actually brought me in and said, this is a great career, and let me show you why. And he was a preacher at one point. He did a lot of preaching on the side. But he said, you can preach at any job. Just do what you like to do. Set an example at work, and your work is the church. And it just really kind of made sense to me. I can live my life the way that I know I should live it, be a good role model to see people that maybe never go to church and have that opportunity. So if you can find how your goals and what your dreams and what you really want to do in life, how it can relate to your profession, that's where that perfect balance is. If that makes sense. So looking at different career paths, I just wanted to put a couple slides in here, and there is some more information on the book, about what do you want to do when you graduate? How are you going to use this degree? Whether you're, 18 or you're 58, doesn't matter. If you're looking to change career paths, not thinking about it, again, being idle, not thinking about it, it's just going to lead to most likely a boring and disappointing life. Be more engaged, more involved. Think about what's going to make you happy. So as you review information about like potential careers, you've got to ask yourself some questions. If you were in that career, what is your day going to look like? What are the main tasks that are going to occupy your time? If you took a job doing this, what is your day really going to look like? Is it really going to fit your interests, your values, your personality? Do you really want to be an accountant when you're more of an outgoing person that likes to go and see people all the time and get out of the office? You may make money as an accountant, but if you like to get out of the office, there are ways to make money. So try to make, was it sales? Is it a career where you are involved in maybe traveling? Some people really stresses them out to travel. They need to be in more of a desk job and like that routine of an accountant, for instance. And so if you're in college right now, think about the qualifications for that perfect job. Where can you get some of these, the background too, not just your education? Try to find a job now. Maybe it could be an internship. It could be working for a company that you can be mentored by someone who's done that before. So I really recommend, don't just go get a job somewhere. Get a job that's going to lead you to the right people. A lot of your success in the world is not just being smart. It's about knowing the right people. And how are you going to meet the right people if you're working for a fast food chain when you would like to be an executive of a different company? Unless you want to be an executive in a fast food chain, you're probably in the wrong job. So what is the demand also for that? Are there going to be a lot of jobs available when you finish your education, or is AI going to change the game? Those are things that you need to think about. Is the demand greater in some areas of the country than others? Are you going to have to relocate? What kind of compensation can you expect? What does someone make? These are questions you can ask now. Get a LinkedIn profile, connect with people, ask questions. Also, are there working conditions? Like, do you want to work over the weekend? Do you want to travel extensively? That you really need to be aware of in this career. So it's really important to get that clear sense of whether the job's going to provide you with that kind of lifestyle that you would like to have. Such an important thing to do now. And another thing important, especially for college students, to understand that there is a digital footprint of you in most cases. You're online, and you need to realize that you're going to be evaluated and looked at. Even as wrong as it may be, employers are going to look at what your digital footprint is. What are you posting online? And that's providing them a bunch of information. They're going to look. So you want to control that e-portfolio is what it's referred to now, that can really show, you remember impression management. Impression management means that you're going to post something, have a LinkedIn profile that this is what you want people to see. This is your resume. If they can't find you on LinkedIn, they're going to go to other social sites, and they see you out partying, drinking with friends and doing things you really wouldn't want a future employee employer knowing, then you need to be very careful of that, because it can be used, and it very likely could be used against you. Matter of fact, there was one firm that did a study. This was in the book, and you see it there at the bottom. They had a study of 275 human resource professional. More than 75% indicated they actively research potential candidates online. And perhaps more relevant is the fact that of those who carried out internet-based searches, this is the thing that may be on the test. It's on the slide. Approximately 70% decided not to hire someone based on what they found on the web. Whew. Think about that. So LinkedIn is a great thing to control. If you haven't connected with me on LinkedIn, please do that now. It's just linkedin.com/n/ and it's Jeff L. Hastings, Hastings. My name's Jeffrey Logan Hastings, but it's Jeff L. Hastings, and you'll find me. I will also connect you with other people in different industries and offer you support after this class. I mean, I'm not just going to answer you just because you're in this class. My help to you is extended beyond that. So I hope you take advantage of that and send me a request and say, hey, I took your class. I mean, love to hear from you, and do that. So consider this. What's one way for a job seeker to gather information about particular jobs? It's called informational interviews. That's something you may want to know. But here are some other things to consider. And we are wrapping it up. So we're finished now. And what I wanted to do was just thank all of you for paying attention in this class. I know we talked about a lot. Navigating the course is not always easy. Setting up the course on my behalf, I can tell you, is not always easy. I've tried to do my best to offer different ways for you to communicate, contact me, to ask questions. I wish more people would have been taken advantage of the once a week open office hour, or the text or email or phone calls. A lot of you have done it a lot, which is, I love it. But some of you I've never spoken with, which is kind of a bummer. But I do hope that you learned something from it. I can't wait to see your presentations next week. But if you have any questions, please let me know. You know my phone number. You know my email address. You even see it on the screen earlier. But I am very honored to teach you this material, and I hope that it was as fun for you as it was for me. Even jokes aside, the horrible jokes, I hope you enjoyed the course. And I will look forward to your presentations after this quiz is done. Have a great day.